Welcome to the Sales with Bob podcast, where we give practical tips and strategies to help sales closers become legends and owners, coaches, and course creators build elite sales teams. Let's go. Hey, what's going on? Bob here from Sales with Bob, and we're going to jump into another podcast. Now, before we jump in, if you would, I would greatly appreciate if you would go ahead and subscribe and like and share with anyone. That would be greatly appreciated. It allows me to get this great content out to more people and help more people start closing more deals. All right. So I'd be very much appreciated. But let's go ahead and jump in here. So what I want to start with is basically this idea that I think it's important to understand is that people make emotional decisions, no matter how much they think they don't or how much you think they don't. Right? I don't care if you have someone in front of you that has a lot of money or a little money, right? Like your chances to close them has very little to do with how much money they have or they don't have, and has everything to do with how honest they can be about where they are, right? What their current situation is and where they want to be, right? If they can be honest about that, like I'm talking deeply honest about that, your chances of closing them are exceptionally high. Because that is where emotion is built, right? So if they can be really honest about like, hey, Kate, you know what? This is where I'm at and I don't like it. It frustrates me. I've been like wanting to get out of it for a long time, and they can really, really like be honest about what it's like to be right here. And we'll get into how to do that in a minute. And then if you can take them to the top and say, okay, like now be really honest where you want to be. And I'm saying like that deep down thing that you're afraid to like say out loud, because then it means like, maybe I need to really do something about this, getting them to really own that. And you build what we would call the gap, right? From where they want to be to where they want to go. And you build that really, really, really big. You are highly likely to close that deal. But here's the critical thing. You got to hit both ends, right? I've seen that a lot of people can be really good at doing the top end because, oh, that's fun, right? But aren't as good at building the bottom. And if your bottom is like up here and your top, you do a great job. That's still a small gap. You got to make sure that both are done really well in order to be able to close and to create that emotion. And the reality is pain makes much more of an impact than goal in that positive side. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, so let's start off here again at the bottom of the gap. So at the bottom of the gap, we're talking about where they want to be, right? So what you want to do in that case is you want to start off in layers. You're not going to obviously get into like heavy impact right away. So you're going to start this in terms of a process. And the first part is just asking basic info questions, right? So you're not getting crazy deep. You're just getting all the information. You're not getting to the impact of that or the emotion of it or any of that stuff yet. It's just you're talking about just generally, like just talking like, hey, cool. Like, okay, so what are you doing for work right now? Okay, what's that like? Do you like that? Is that personal? Do you like, going to work? Like, what's that like? How many hours you work in? How much money are you making? Like all those kinds of things, just information gathering, right? So you're going to collect all this information. And that's the first layer. And the thing that's important to understand too here is, because I know a lot of times with newer closers, they feel like, oh, well, I'm asking all these personal questions. Well, yeah, they're on a call. And if you framed it well, you're going to be okay. And as long as you act like that's the norm, guess what? They're going to go with the flow. It's all about confident how you present yourself. And if you present it in a way of like, hey, this is just normal for us to have this conversation, then guess what? They're going to feel that, experience that, and they're going to give back, right? And they're not going to have any problem answering your questions, all right? Most of the time when there's issues on a call, it's you. Just being honest, all right? It's just you. It's your own kind of limiting beliefs, the things that you're thinking about and struggling here. They're feeling that and sensing that, and they're feeding off of that, right? Whereas if you go in with confidence and like, hey, this is the norm, they're going to go with the flow. All right. So just keep that in mind when you're asking questions. But again, you're going to still layer it. So you start off with some basic info questions, kind of get into some of those things. Then you're going to start to get into like, I guess what they say, a little bit of an assessment, right? So so they start talking about their job. They talk about work, hours, those sorts of things. And they're saying like, oh, okay, I work 60 hours a week and, well, my boss is kind of a pain, whatever. Like, okay, so then you're going to assess that, right? Like, okay, cool. Like, do you want to be working 60 hours a week? Well, no. Okay. So that's not good. Right. So, okay. So there's assessment number one, right? And you just keep assessing the things they've said. So you just determine like good, bad, how bad, like there's an assessment in there. Right. You're not necessarily getting into a ton of emotion. You're not kind of pushing on that yet, but you're starting to get at it. You're kind of digging that hole a little bit deeper. In terms of assessing the information that they've now given you. Now, once you've built that assessment, now you want to talk a little bit about impact, right? So now you're definitely going deeper. So it's like when they say like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm working like 60 to 70 hours a week and they've said like, yeah, it's not a good thing. I don't want to be working that many hours. Now, next, it's like impact. Okay, like cool. Like, so like, how does that impact you then? Right. Like, and you don't have to use the word impact, right? But like, so like, how does that affect you? Like at home, like if they have a family, like things like that. So this is where you can be like, okay, well, yeah, I'm not really able to spend time with my kids, right? Or my wife. I get home and I'm exhausted and I don't have energy left, like whatever. Like, just like, so this is where you get into the impact. So what is the impact of their current situation on their current life, on themselves, their own like feeling, maybe depression, sad, whatever it might be, right? How they're spending their time, all those things. So you're talking about the impact of that, right? So and ask us when you really get into the impact of that and think beyond just them, right? Into family, into other circumstances, things like that, health, whatever it might be, mental health. So you get into the impact. Then finally, now you've already started to obviously get into some of the emotion with that, but you haven't used maybe that terminology. So now, like, again, we'll use the kid example because that's always a good one, depending upon what the situation is. But like, okay, yeah, so I'm working 78 hours a week. We know that. Okay. Now we've made an assessment. That's not a good thing. Don't want to be doing that. Impacted that as well. I'm not able to spend time with my kids. That's really frustrating. I want to be around for them. Okay. Like, well, so how does that make you feel? Like, is that like frustrating, sad? How does that make you feel? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like, yeah, it's really frustrating. It's sad. Like, yeah, I can imagine like that's going to be tough. Like if your kids are younger, you want to make sure like you spend time with them and things, right? Like talk to me a little bit more about that. Right. And you pull out a little bit more emotion in them. And here's the deal. Like I understand too, like you're just trying to help them be honest. I don't, this isn't about, being disingenuous or trying to get them to say something that's not true. This is just about getting them to be honest because most people aren't honest about how they really feel. They're afraid to kind of put it out there. But this is exactly what they need sometimes to kind of like push them to take action, right? Is they need that honesty, right? So understand that should come from a good place. I think in everything you watch from me, you'll always see that everything we do should come from a genuine place of caring and concern for the person in front of you. So I just want to put that out there, make sure that's understood. Okay. But anyway, so you're going to kind of get into the emotions. So far we've done kind of information gathering, assessment, now what kind of impacts is happening, and then the emotional kind of impact with that. And then finally on the bottom side is like, okay, what have you done about that? Or what can you do? Right. And so the goal of this is say like, okay, well, I haven't done a whole lot, or maybe they have and they haven't gone anywhere. And I'm not really sure what else to do, which is why I'm on this call. Right. And the goal of that is to say like, okay, cool. Like, so you haven't done anything or anything you've done hasn't worked. You don't really have any other place to go. So is it fair to say that like what we have to offer here, if this lines up, it makes sense for us to really take this serious and look at this as an option in terms of next step for you, right? So you can get some good buy-in there if you do that really well. And so that's important on this end. So again, so at this point in time, you've gotten kind of that bottom of gap type gathering. You've created that emotion, all those things. You've been gotten them to be really honest about their current situation. Now, from there, what you want to do is now you want to kind of jump up to the top, right? And before, well, now I'll get into the top first, okay? And then I'll say one other thing. So now as we move to the top, you want to do the same thing in terms of the ladder, right? So it's like, okay, listen, you've already maybe done some buying, you've got some motion, like, hey, listen, I really appreciate you sharing all that. I know, whatever you want to say, like, I really appreciate you sharing all that. Now let's talk about maybe something that's a little bit more kind of fun to talk about, right? Let's talk about, where you want to go. What are your goals, right? Ultimately, like, where would you want to be? So let's talk about that, right? How many hours would you want to continue to still work your job, but less, or would you not want to work your job? Would you you'd want to spend time with a kid, whatever, like just get some basic information. Like what would you want? How much money would you want to be earning? What will paint the picture? Okay. And obviously I'm being very more personal. It's going to be different with business. I'll talk about that in a minute, but you get the idea. You can obviously take this and nuance it to whatever kind of niche you're in, or whether it's kind of personal versus business and things like that. Concepts are the same. Anyway, so you're going to do the same type of thing, right? Information, assessing, impact, and emotion, right? So in terms of the top of the gap, right? You're talking like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, so you'd want to be only working, like 30 hours or whatever a week. You'd really want a lot of flexibility in that to be able to spend time with your kids. So this is what you're looking for. Okay, cool. And like, what kind of a difference, so that's the good, that's kind of do an assessment with information in there. And what kind of impact would that have? Well, I mean, man, my relationship with the kids would be so much better. I could actually, like, my wife would be happy because I'm around, like helping out more, whatever it is. that kind of thing. And then like, yeah, so like, cool. I mean, that sounds amazing. Like, how would that feel to you? Like, how would you feel in comparison, like how you feel right now? Oh man, I'd feel like free. I would just feel like joy, whatever. Like, and then you kind of get into the emotion, right? So same type of thing. And what I would encourage is really kind of um, push that a little bit, not like in a pushy kind of way, but in a way of like, make sure you get deep enough into the emotion, right? And get them to be honest about that, get them to think about like their relationships with people and just really try to paint a clear picture and get them to feel and experience as if they're really there as best you can. Okay. So that's ultimately the goal. Now, when you do that, now you've created a really, really, really big gap. Okay. And again, so I keep talking about like business versus personal. Ultimately, you're doing the same thing. There are going to be nuances. I would say that in terms of business versus personal, business decisions are still emotional decisions. All right. They're kind of disguised sometimes in more practical thinking, but there's still emotion attached to it. Now, if it's like purely business, and it's because there's some offers that are more like personal in terms of like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to build this business, but it's really like a personal, like entrepreneur, solopreneur kind of thing. That's definitely very emotional. It's about time freedom or location freedom or those kinds of things. Like that's not even really business. It is, but it isn't. So you're still going to approach it from a personal standpoint. But if it's true like business to business, and you're providing a specific business service to a legit business, it's a little bit different in terms of that, but there's still going to be an emotional piece to them in terms of like solving whatever that problem is and things. So you're still going to hit on that, but it will become a bit more about the business versus them personally. But then you still can bring it back to them personally in terms of, or at least the business personally, in terms of like, how would that make the CEO feel? How would that make everyone feel in the business if this happened or things like that? So it's still the same process. The types of questions that you ask may be a little bit different, and the way you get there might be a little bit different. Okay. But conceptually, it's still doing the same thing, still building that gap and doing all those sorts of things. If anyone has any more questions on it, you can let me know and I can try to kind of help you understand how that looks. So what I would say to you is that ultimately the single most important thing on a call is the gap. And I mean, to go through this all the time with sales teams, I can look at calls and like, oh, what's this? It's this. And then I go back and I look at the call and I see that they didn't build a gap. And I'm like, until you build a gap, you can't know any of these other problems that you think were the problem prior to the gap and the discovery. I will never believe that these things are the problem until you've done this well, because it's just so important. It really is. Because if you haven't done that, then you're putting yourself in such a difficult position to close the deal. Because if they're not emotionally attached to it, if they haven't been honest about this, you're going to have a hard time. So all these other things that are happening here in terms of objections, in terms of, oh, well, financially, I'm not sure if I can do it. I need to talk to this person or that person. Like all of that is coming because right here, they were not emotionally bought in yet. If they're emotionally bought in, they're like, yes, this pain, oh my gosh, I have to get rid of it. Those other things, they're just not going to come up as much. Right. And so that's so important to understand that this is I would say, is the single biggest determining factor in terms of close. And I would say ease of close as well. All right. Hope that makes sense. Now, to help with this a little bit on the front end of your call, I would encourage you to frame your call a bit. And I discourage like a really formal frame, unless you're like high level business corporate. It's going to be a little different, but outside of that, I think you should keep your frame very short and relatively informal, but clear, right? So an example might be something like, so, hey, listen, on the front end, I just want to kind of get to know you a little bit and just kind of understand a little bit about your situation. So basically I can kind of get a sense if, I think we could help you out or whatever. So in the beginning, I'll just kind of dive into some things and make sure I understand kind of where you're at. And then, hey, listen, if all that kind of lines up, I'll be more than happy to share a little bit more about kind of the offer and us and how we work so that you can make sure it's a good fit for you as well. And if both those line up, then what we can do is we can go ahead and get you set up here at the end of the call. So does that sound good? That's it. Good frame, right? So now what I've said is basically at the beginning, hey, I need you to give me time because I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I want to get to know you and your situation, right? And then once we've done that, then I'll be more than happy to answer questions and get into the other stuff. Right. So that short little frame will help a lot towards kind of moving you in the right direction. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is, so typically after discovery, right? You're going to get into your pitch at some point in time. Now, if you've done a really, really good job on building the gap, the emotion, the buy-in's already going to be there. The truth is I believe that predominantly, in most cases, 90 to 95% of the close is already done once you've gone through the gap. Okay. So what that means is your pitch should not be long, right? And super like detailed, and like it should be short, concise, and clear. Right. I'm not be clear, like, hey, here's what we're going to do. This is how we do it. This is what it's going to look like. Clear, concise, to the point, right? But short, right? It doesn't need to be long. Everyone thinks you're not selling that, right? You're selling the solution to the gap, right? And if that's what they want, right? And if they're bought in on that, that's what you focus on. And yes, this obviously is what's kind of solving that, but you don't need a lot of details at that point in time. It just needs to be really, really clear. And the reality is sometimes when you get into a really long pitch, it actually gets less clear because now there's like, wait, I don't get it. Wait, you went over here, you went over here. Like there's a million different things and you're giving them so much information. You've created information overload. And now all the emotion that you built in that gap is now gone. And now they're back to practical, like thinking, right? And again, I'm not saying you don't want them to be practical, but we don't make good, challenging, growth producing decisions based on practicality. We make it based upon emotion. Like we need to be motivated and inspired because it is difficult to grow. That just is a reality. Okay. It's difficult to grow. So we need that. Anyways, so short pitch, concise, clear, to the point. All right. Now, will you once in a while run into someone who's like what I call an owl, like where they're super analytical and things like that? And will you need to break things down in more detail? Yes. Will that happen often? No. All right. So just keep that in mind. Now, in terms of like, so everything we just talked about in the discovery, it's all about asking questions, right? It's about asking good questions. And that is what it should be. Like when you look at your call, that front end should be like 90% them talking. Okay. So that's super, super important. And so in terms of asking those good questions, it is good and okay to brainstorm, like, what are the questions I'm going to ask, generally speaking, at each phase, right? In terms of like, okay, here's my information gathering, here's my assessment questions, my impact, my emotion. Like, here's kind of what those questions might look like. But what I would say is, like, you can do that to kind of think through it, but ultimately, you want that to become something that's more natural, right? So, and I do think this is a problem sometimes with some of the training that's out there, is they'll like really highly focus on having like these lists of questions that you'll go through with people. And it's not that like the questions are bad. It's just, I think they need to be more natural, because what can happen sometimes when you have a list of questions is the way you ask them, when you start to ask them, can feel very disconnected. Okay. And I think that's a bad thing. Now, that's another confusing thing that's happening right now in a lot of training videos, I think, that are out there right now, is they'll talk about wanting to be disconnected and that's a good thing. Now, I hope what they mean is that they want, what they're encouraging is being disconnected from the sale, disconnected from wanting money, not disconnected from the prospect. And I don't know. I'm not going to get into what they think. I think it's critically important that you are connected to the prospect. You don't want to be disconnected. You don't want them to feel disconnected. Like you just have like your list of questions. Okay, here's question one. What's your answer? Right. Question two. Right. Like that doesn't feel good. No one's going to like buy in on that. Okay. So I do think like ultimately, like I talk about my 3 C's, not going to get into a lot of that in this, but one of them is curious. Right. So create that curiosity that's going to naturally kind of bring out those questions. And you want to dive a little deeper and kind of into those things. Again, brainstorming, reading what other people have, suggestions for questions, all good stuff. So you kind of have some of that in here. But ultimately, over time, as you get more experience, you want to be able to have that happen naturally. And I do believe that the best of closers are just going to be able to do that naturally. Okay. So just something to kind of keep in mind. The other thing is make sure you're using the gap throughout the rest of the call. So even when you get into pitch and other things, keep bringing up things that were talked about here. So point back to kind of that gap, if you will, and some of the problems they were facing and things like that, and how kind of things they're going to be taught or whatever are going to like help them to solve that, things like that. So just keep that in mind in terms of kind of pushing that through the call. All right. Now, another really, really big thing that I think is really important once you've built a gap is, so you've built kind of the bottom of the gap, you've built the top of the gap, you have this amazing gap. So you've done this, you bring them up here and they're ecstatic, they're excited. Now, what I would say is really, really powerful is now is take that away from them. Okay. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I know I smiled when I said it, right? I don't mean that in a mean way, but it's kind of bringing them back to reality, right? And it's like, so a lot of time people talk about cost of inaction. That's kind of what we're talking about, right? So like you just built this amazing vision of where they want to be, where they have a lot more freedom, they're spending time with their family, whatever. And now it's kind of like a question of like, okay, now let's say like you do nothing today, right? And so none of that happens. What do you think about that? Right. And just kind of let them sit with that. Be like, man. And then it's like, okay, so like, and then so they say whatever they say, but it's like, yeah, like what would it be like to like just be back where we talked about, where you're just stuck here and you're not able to do that, right? Like, and kind of so you kind of pull it away, because it's really important for them to understand that if they don't take action, if they don't change anything, everything stays the same. And again, it's a reminder of like the truth and the honesty about them and their frustrations of where they are. And then nothing changes unless they kind of take action, right? If they do something about it. And so that can be very, very, very powerful. That cost of inaction, and really, and I would say do it from like an empathetic standpoint, right? Show some empathy in it, right? Don't do it as like a jerk, as like, oh, well, if you do nothing and like you have this like mean certain, I think it's better if it comes from a place of empathy, of like, feeling for them. Like, okay, yeah, if you don't do that, like, yeah, I mean, you talked about your kids, your family, like this is real. Like, let's like just being real, just being really honest with you. Like, I want to see the best happen for you. And like, if you don't do anything, like you're stuck. Like, what does that mean? Like, and just really, really honest questions. And get them to own that. Because at that point in time, that's when it's kind of, again, more that check-in of like, before you're getting into pitch and getting that kind of buy-in of like, okay, like, so we get it, right? Like, this is a pretty important decision. And like, if you don't do this, like you're stuck where you are. And it sounds like that, like, that's not a good thing, man. Like, it sounds like you're talking about like not spending time with your kids, you're talking about relationship with the kids, your family, you're talking about your own mental health. Like, this is very, very serious. Would you agree with me on that? Okay, cool. So like scale of 1 to 10, like how important is for you to get going on this like today? Right. And you can play with the numbers. This, we don't have time right now to dig into what do you say with the different numbers, but like, you basically, that's where you can get some really good buy-in of like, hey, we are going to do something to change your future today. Right. And they buy in. And again, they may say like, oh, okay, well, it depends on this or whatever, but cool. Like, I get it. Maybe it depends on price, whatever. Like, cool. Like, we'll get into all that. Let's put that aside right now. Right. Like, this is like, and then get that buy-in, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And you'll do that after pitch, before dropping price too. I'll get into that maybe in another episode, kind of talking more about those, like when did your buy-ins and things. But anyway, so what I can guarantee is that if you do this and you get really good at doing this, and it comes from a genuine place, I can guarantee you that your close rate will increase exponentially, right? Especially if you're not doing it at all, right? If you're just doing it okay, maybe you're having some, but here's the deal. The bigger and the better you get at building that gap in a genuine way and getting them to be honest about that and really focusing on that as that being the meat of your call, I am 100% certain that your close rate is going to increase significantly, because it is the number one factor that impacts your close rate. All right. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions about this, or want any other info, maybe you need some help with this, whatever it is, if you are a closer, or if you're maybe a manager of closers, or again, if you are a coach, if I can help you in a way, definitely feel free to reach out. Again, if you would be willing to subscribe, like, share it, that would be amazing. If this was helpful whatsoever, I would really appreciate that. And again, yeah, if you have any questions, anything, just feel free to reach out and be more than happy to see if I can help you in some way. All right. Thanks so much for being here for another episode, and best of luck out there.